Mom, could you eat in the kitchen tonight?
It's only one dinner.
You brought it, right?
You remembered this. Open it. The building stays mine.
What did you do?
You can't use it as collateral.
Mom, could you just eat in the kitchen tonight? We're already crowded. For a moment, I thought I had misheard my son. I stood beside the Thanksgiving table holding my plate while 12-year-old Sophie tried to pull out a chair for me. Rebecca quickly stopped her. It's only one dinner, Mildred. One dinner. In the dining room, I had helped Jason renovate when his business was nearly broke. Then Jason's eyes dropped to my purse. You brought the envelope, right? That was when something inside me went still. I reached into my purse, wrapped my fingers around the sealed envelope he had been waiting weeks to receive, and slowly pulled it out. Jason smiled. He had no idea what was actually inside. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever felt taken for granted by someone you loved, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have gone quietly into that kitchen or opened the envelope right there at the table? 3 years before that Thanksgiving dinner, before the missing chair and the envelope in my purse, my life had been divided into two simple parts: the years when Walter was alive and everything that came after. Walter Henry had been my husband for 43 years. We met when I was 22 at a church fundraiser outside Richmond, Virginia. He was standing beside a folding table trying to repair one of its broken legs with a pocket knife and a piece of wire. You know that's not going to hold, I told him. He looked up at me and smiled. Then I guess you'd better stay and make sure nobody gets hurt. That was Walter. Quiet, practical, funny when you least expected it. We never became what people would call wealthy overnight. Everything we owned came slowly. One paycheck, one mortgage payment, one careful decision at a time. Walter worked in construction management for most of his career, and I spent nearly 30 years as an administrative manager for a local construction company. We understood invoices, payroll contracts, and the dangerous difference between looking successful and actually being financially secure. By the time we reached our 60s, we had built a comfortable life. Our house was paid off. We had retirement savings. And years earlier, Walter and I had purchased a modest commercial property on the south side of Richmond. It wasn't glamorous, a brick building with warehouse space in the back and offices in front, but Walter always believed the neighborhood would eventually grow. Land doesn't care whether people are impressed by you, he once told me. It just sits there and waits. That building would become more important than either of us could have imagined. But when Walter died, property was the last thing on my mind. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He had poured himself coffee, complained that I had bought the wrong brand of orange juice, kissed my forehead, and walked toward the garage. Minutes later, I heard something fall. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was kneeling beside him on the kitchen floor, holding his hand and begging him to stay. He didn't. A heart attack took my husband before I had time to understand that our last conversation had been about orange juice. The weeks afterward exist in my memory, like photographs with pieces missing, flowers, casseroles, sympathy cards, people hugging me in the church hallway. Then everyone went home. The silence was unbearable. For 43 years I had fallen asleep beside another person. Suddenly I could hear every sound the house made at night. That was when Jason became my anchor. My only son was 39 then. He came over almost every day after Walter's funeral. Sometimes he brought Sophie, who was 9, and still young enough to crawl beside me on the couch and put her head in my lap without asking questions. Jason replaced a broken porch light. He cleaned the gutters. He checked the furnace. He called every evening, "You okay, Mom?" Most nights I lied, "I'm fine," and most nights he seemed to understand what I meant. Rebecca came too, although less often. She would bring food or flowers and remind me that I could call them any time. During those months, I genuinely believed losing Walter had brought my family closer. Perhaps that was why I didn't hesitate when Jason came to me about his business. It was roughly 6 months after Walter died. Jason had started Henry home renovations several years earlier. Walter had been enormously proud of him. My husband never gave Jason the company. He never handed him a career, but he gave him advice, introduced him to people in the industry, and occasionally spent Saturday mornings looking over estimates with him. After Walter died, Jason seemed determined to make the company bigger. One evening, he came to my house alone. I knew immediately something was wrong. He barely touched the coffee I made him. Finally, he leaned forward. "Mom, I hate asking you this. Those words frightened me." "What happened?" "Nothing catastrophic." I remember that phrase exactly. Nothing catastrophic. Jason explained that 2 clients were late paying invoices while payroll and material costs were due. The company was healthy, he insisted. It was simply a temporary cash flow problem. How much, I asked. He hesitated. $25,000 would get us through. $25,000 wasn't pocket change. But I had savings. And this was my son. More importantly, I could almost hear Walter telling me that Jason's company mattered. So I transferred the money. Jason hugged me tightly. I'll pay every cent back. You take care of your employees first, I said. Your father would want that. His eyes filled with tears at the mention of Walter. That moment stayed with me. It also made what happened later much harder to accept. The $25,000 was never repaid. At first I didn't care. Then about 4 months later, Jason had another problem. A contractor dispute had delayed a major payment. This time he needed $15,000. I helped again. Months after that, he needed additional credit to purchase materials for a large renovation project. He asked whether I would guarantee part of a business line of credit. I hesitated. Jason noticed. Dad believed in this company, he said quietly. I wish I could say I recognized what was happening. I didn't. I signed. Each request had a reasonable explanation. Each request was temporary. And each time I told myself the same thing. This is what family does. Then came the building. Henry Home Renovations had outgrown the small space Jason was renting. Commercial rent was increasing, and Jason complained that moving somewhere larger would drain the company. I mentioned the property Walter and I owned. The tenant had recently left, and the building was sitting mostly empty. Jason's face brightened. Seriously, you could use it for a while. How much would you charge? I thought about Walter. Then I shook my head. Nothing until you get back on your feet. Jason stood and wrapped both arms around me. You have no idea what this means. Actually, I thought I did. I thought I was protecting something Walter had loved. His son. Jason moved Henry Home Renovations into the building a few weeks later. At first, he thanked me constantly. He sent photographs of the new office. He showed me where he planned to meet clients. Sophie even drew a little picture for my refrigerator that said Daddy's new workplace. For the first year, I felt proud whenever I drove past it. Then something subtle began to change. Jason stopped calling it Mom's building. Then he stopped calling it Grandma and Grandpa's building. Eventually, it became simply the building. Rebecca went further. One afternoon while we were having lunch, she mentioned a renovation Jason wanted to make. I told him he should redo the reception area at his building. His building. The words caught my attention. I looked at her. You mean the building he's using? Rebecca blinked. Oh, right. Of course. She smiled and continued eating. It seemed too petty to correct her further. So I didn't. That became a pattern. I didn't correct. I didn't question. I didn't ask when the $25,000 would be repaid. I didn't remind Jason that until you get back on your feet was supposed to have an ending. I told myself I was choosing peace. Looking back, I understand something now that I didn't understand then. Peace and silence are not always the same thing. Sometimes silence merely gives another person room to move your boundaries while you're pretending not to notice. Still, Jason was my son. When he called, I answered. When Sophie needed something, I gave it gladly. When Rebecca thanked me less enthusiastically than before, I ignored it. And whenever a small voice inside me whispered that my generosity was becoming expected, I pushed that voice away. Then, almost 2 years after Walter's death, I stopped by the commercial building without calling first. Jason wasn't there. Rebecca was. She was standing with an interior designer in the reception area, pointing toward one of the walls. She didn't notice me immediately. I want something more impressive here, she said. Once this place is officially ours, we can finally make it look expensive. Officially ours. I stood near the doorway with my car keys still in my hand. Rebecca turned. Her expression changed instantly. Mildred, I didn't know you were coming. I smiled. Neither did she know that 4 words had just lodged themselves inside my mind. Once this place is officially ours. I drove home that afternoon trying to convince myself she had simply misspoken. But for the first time since Walter died, I opened the folder containing the deed to that building. My name was still there, Mildred Henry, and as I stared at it, I wondered why I suddenly felt the need to make sure. For several weeks after I heard Rebecca say, "Once this place is officially ours," I tried to convince myself that I was making too much of it. Grief had made me cautious, I told myself. Maybe lonely people notice things other people would ignore. So I put the deed back in its folder and returned it to the small fireproof box in my bedroom closet. But once you notice a change in someone, it becomes difficult to stop seeing it. Jason still called me. The difference was that almost every call now had a purpose. Mom, do you still have Dad's old contractor files? Mom, could you pick Sophie up Thursday? Mom, would you mind covering Sophie's summer camp deposit? Rebecca already told her she could go. I never minded helping Sophie. That child was one of the brightest parts of my life. She would run through my front door, drop her backpack in the hallway, and shout, "Grandma, guess what happened today?" With Sophie, I never wondered whether I was useful enough to deserve affection. She simply loved me. That made it easy for Jason and Rebecca to attach expenses to her. One afternoon, Rebecca called about Sophie's dance program. "It's almost 1,800 for the years," she said. "I know it sounds like a lot, but she loves it. Then you and Jason should talk about whether it fits your budget." There was a pause. "Oh, I just thought Grandma would want to help." The sentence bothered me, not because I couldn't afford it, because she had already turned my generosity into an expectation. I paid anyway. That was my mistake. Around the same time, Jason and Rebecca's lifestyle seemed to improve dramatically. Jason arrived at my house in a new SUV. Rebecca replaced the furniture in their living room. They started hosting elaborate dinners for clients. Then they remodeled their kitchen. When I asked Jason whether business was doing better, he gave me a complicated answer about growth receivables and reinvestment. "So you're profitable now?" I asked. "We're moving in the right direction." "Then maybe we should talk about rent on the building." His expression changed, only for a second. Already he had been using it free for nearly 2 years. "I'm not trying to pressure you," I said. "I just thought you were back on your feet." "We are, mostly. But commercial rent would pull money out of the company when I need to keep investing." Then he smiled. "Give me a little longer, Mom." And I did. Patty was less forgiving. My sister had spent 38 years as a nurse, which meant she had developed a remarkable ability to recognize nonsense before the person speaking it had finished the sentence. We were having lunch one Tuesday when I mentioned Jason's new SUV. Patty lowered her fork. "What kind?" I told her. "And he's still using your building for free. He's growing the company. So you're subsidizing the growth. That isn't fair, isn't it?" I frowned. Patty leaned back. "Mildred helping someone through a bad year is generosity. Financing their lifestyle while they tell you they're struggling is something else. He's my son. I know who he is. Walter would have helped him." Patty's expression softened. "Walter would have asked to see the books." That silenced me. She was right. Walter loved Jason fiercely, but Walter never confused love with carelessness. Still, I defended my son. I told Patty Jason was under pressure. I told her running a business was complicated. Mostly, I told her the things I needed to hear myself. Then came Rebecca's comment at dinner. Jason had invited me over on a Sunday evening. Sophie was talking about a school trip when Rebecca mentioned that some families couldn't afford the cost. "I could help if one of her friends needs it," I said. Rebecca laughed. "You're sweet, Mildred. Honestly, what else are you going to spend your money on?" I looked at her. She continued casually. "I mean, you don't really need much money at your age." The room became very quiet to me, although Sophie was still talking. I waited for Jason to say something. Anything. He could have told Rebecca that was inappropriate. He could have laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. Instead, he kept cutting his steak. Finally, he said Rebecca didn't mean anything by it. I hadn't accused her of anything. That was what hurt. He defended her before I had even spoken. I went home early that night. A few days later, Patty came over for coffee. When I told her what happened, she didn't say "I told you so." She simply reached across the table and touched my hand. "You need boundaries. They're family. Family needs boundaries more than strangers do." I looked away. Patty continued gently. "You've spent your whole life giving Mildred, but if you never let people hear no, eventually they stop understanding that yes was a gift." Those words stayed with me. Still, I changed nothing, not yet. Then Jason asked me a question I couldn't dismiss. It happened one Saturday afternoon while he was helping me move boxes from the garage. We had been talking about nothing important when he suddenly said, "Have you updated your estate plan since Dad died?" I stopped. "Some things. You should make sure everything's clear." "It is." He nodded, then lifted another box. A few seconds passed. "What happens to the commercial building?" I looked at him. "What do you mean, if something happened to you?" He tried to sound casual. "Who gets it?" There was something strange about hearing your child discuss your death as an administrative possibility. "I haven't gone anywhere yet, Jason. I know that. I'm just thinking ahead." For whom he gave a short laugh. "Come on, Mom, don't make it weird." I hadn't. He had. Then he asked, "Does it come to me automatically?" I felt a coldness move through me. "Why do you want to know?" "Because my company operates there. I need to understand what would happen." That explanation was reasonable. Maybe too reasonable. I watched my son walk toward the garage door. For the first time, I noticed he hadn't asked what would happen to my home, or my savings, or whether I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. He had asked about one thing, the building. That night, I opened the fireproof box again. I took out the deed and placed it on my kitchen table. Mildred Henry, my name, my property. Something Walter and I had spent years paying for. I ran my finger across the paper and remembered Patty's warning. If you never let people hear no, eventually they stop understanding that yes was a gift. I still wasn't ready to believe my son wanted to take advantage of me. But for the first time, I began wondering what would happen if I finally told him no. I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, Jason arrived at my front door carrying a thick folder. And before he even sat down, he said something that made every warning I'd ignored suddenly feel real. "Mom, I think it's time we simplified things for you." Jason placed the folder on my kitchen table as carefully as if he were bringing me a gift. "I think it's time we simplified things for you, Mom." I looked at the folder, then at him. "What things you know? Property, paperwork, responsibilities." He smiled and sat across from me. "You shouldn't have to worry about all this stuff anymore." All this stuff. I had spent nearly 30 years managing contracts, payroll records, insurance documents, vendor agreements, and budgets. I had helped Walter organize our finances from the day we married. But suddenly my own son was speaking to me as if opening an envelope might exhaust me. "I'm 69, Jason, not 99, I know." He laughed. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" His smile tightened. "I just want your life to be easier." He opened the folder. Several documents were clipped together inside. Jason pushed them toward me. "I've been talking to some people about the building." My stomach tightened. "What people?" "My accountant. Business people." He avoided specifics. "Henry Home Renovations has operated there for years now. It doesn't really make sense for you to keep carrying the property separately. Carrying it taxes, insurance, liability. I know what owning property involves. Of course you do." His voice became softer. "But Dad handled a lot of this before he died. That irritated me. Your father and I handled it together." Jason looked down. "Right, I didn't mean it that way. But he had." He turned the documents around so they faced me. "What I'm proposing is simple. Transfer the building to Henry Home Renovations. Then everything connected to the business is under one roof." I stared at him. "You want me to give you the building? It's not really giving it to me. Whose company is Henry Home Renovations? Mine. Then it sounds remarkably similar to giving it to you." Jason exhaled. "You're making it sound worse than it is. Then explain it better." He leaned back. "The company has been maintaining the property." That was partly true. Jason had repaired plumbing, replaced light fixtures, and painted the offices. But he had also occupied the building rent-free for almost 2 years. "You're using it," I said. "Businesses usually maintain properties they use." He frowned. "I'm trying to create something Dad would have been proud of." There it was again. Walter. Whenever Jason needed my emotions to move faster than my judgment, somehow his father entered the conversation. I looked at the documents. "What is the building worth?" Now Jason hesitated. It was brief, but I noticed. It's hard to say. "You've been talking to accountants and business people, but nobody knows what it's worth. Commercial values fluctuate, approximately. Maybe a few hundred thousand. The answer was so vague that it made me more suspicious. I remembered Walter buying that property years earlier, when the neighborhood was mostly warehouses and small repair businesses. Recently, I had noticed new restaurants opening nearby. An old warehouse had become apartments. Construction signs seemed to be everywhere. "How much exactly?" I asked. "Mom, that's not really the point. It is if you're asking me to transfer it." Jason's jaw tightened. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Rebecca," he answered. "Hey." I could hear her voice faintly. Jason glanced at me. "Yeah, I'm with her now." Another pause. "No, she hasn't signed yet." Something about that sentence made me straighten. He listened, then held the phone toward me. "Rebecca wants to say hi." I didn't take it, so he switched to speaker. Mildred Rebecca sounded unusually cheerful. "Jason told me you two were finally getting the property situation organized. Finally." As if my ownership were a problem everyone had been waiting for me to correct. "We're discussing it," I said. "Well, that's wonderful. It'll give everyone some certainty." "Certainty about what?" There was silence. Then Rebecca laughed. "You know, the future." "No, Rebecca." "I don't know," Jason interrupted. "She just means business planning." Rebecca quickly agreed. "Exactly. That's all." After the call ended, Jason closed the folder. "You don't have to decide this second." "That's generous." He ignored my sarcasm. "Take a few days, read everything, but I'd really like to have it handled before Thanksgiving." Why Thanksgiving end-of-year planning? Thanksgiving isn't the end of the year. Jason stood. Mom. His frustration finally showed. I'm trying to make this easier for everybody. Everybody. I noticed he hadn't said easier for me. He kissed my cheek before leaving. The folder remained on my kitchen table. I didn't touch it for nearly an hour. Instead, I made tea and sat looking at it. Walter had always told me that pressure was information. If somebody needs your answer faster than you need to give it, he once said, figure out why. So I decided to figure out why. I went upstairs and opened the cabinet where I kept our older financial records. Walter had labeled everything meticulously. House, retirement, insurance, commercial property. I carried the property folder downstairs. Inside were the original purchase documents, tax statements, old appraisals, and handwritten notes Walter had made over the years. Then I found a map. Walter had circled several neighboring parcels. Beside them in his handwriting were 4 words, future redevelopment potential. Hold. I stared at the note. Then I opened my laptop. It didn't take long. The neighborhood had changed far more than I realized. A mixed-use development had been approved less than a mile away. An old industrial property nearby had sold to a developer. New apartments were planned. Restaurants and retail spaces were moving into the corridor. I searched recent commercial property listings. The numbers surprised me. Properties smaller than mine were listed for far more than the few $100,000 Jason had casually suggested. My pulse began to quicken. Maybe he truly didn't know. That was what I wanted to believe. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, Jason had mentioned attending a neighborhood development meeting because road construction might affect his business. If he attended those meetings, he knew what was happening in that area. He had to. I returned to the documents he had brought. For the first time, I read every page carefully. The language was dense, but one thing was perfectly clear. This wasn't temporary management authority. It wasn't permission to operate his business there. It was a transfer. Once signed and recorded, Henry Home Renovations would own the property, not me. I picked up my phone. For a moment, my thumb hovered over Jason's name. I wanted to call him. I wanted to demand an explanation. Instead, I scrolled farther down my contacts. Richard Bennett. Richard had handled legal matters for Walter and me for more than 15 years. I hadn't spoken to him since updating a few documents after Walter's death. I called his office. Richard Bennett's office. This is Mildred Henry. A few minutes later, Richard came on the line. Mildred, it's good to hear from you. Is everything all right? I looked at Jason's folder. I don't know. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. My son brought me some documents involving the commercial property Walter and I owned. There was a brief silence. What kind of documents? He wants me to transfer it to his company. Richard didn't answer immediately. Then he said something that made the room seem suddenly colder. Mildred, don't sign anything. My fingers tightened around the phone. I wasn't planning to. Good. His voice had changed. No warmth now, only professional seriousness. Bring everything Jason gave you to my office tomorrow. Richard, is something wrong? Another pause. I'd rather explain after I've seen the documents. I looked again at Walter's handwritten words. Future redevelopment potential. Hold. Then Richard added quietly, and Mildred, bring your original deed too. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether I was being overly suspicious. The next morning, I carried both folders into Richard Bennett's office. By the time I left, I would know exactly what Jason hadn't told me. And the number attached to that secret was far larger than I was prepared to hear. Richard Bennett had known Walter and me for more than 15 years, so when I walked into his office carrying 2 folders against my chest, he didn't begin with legal questions. He looked at my face and said, "Sit down, Mildred." That frightened me more than anything. Richard was 53, careful with words and almost impossible to rattle. His office looked exactly as it had when Walter and I updated our estate documents years earlier. Dark shelves framed degrees, neat stacks of files. I handed him Jason's folder first. He says this will simplify things. Richard adjusted his glasses. Let's see what simplify means. For the next 15 minutes, he read in silence. I watched his expression change. Not dramatically, that wasn't Richard. But twice he went back to reread a page. Finally, he placed the documents on his desk. This is a transfer of ownership, so I understood it correctly. Yes, no temporary arrangement, no. No management authority. No, if I sign this, what happens? Once everything is properly executed and recorded, Henry Home Renovations becomes the owner. And Jason owns Henry Home Renovations. Yes, the answer hurt even though I already knew it. Richard opened the second folder containing my original documents. Your title is clean. You are the sole owner. Walter's name doesn't create any complication. No, everything transferred correctly after his death. I looked down at my hands. So Jason can't do anything without me, not legally. Something in his tone caught my attention. What does that mean? It means he needs your signature. I stared at him. Richard leaned back. Mildred, before we discuss anything else, I need to ask you something. Did Jason tell you what this property is worth? He said maybe a few $100,000. Richard's face went still. What he said, commercial values fluctuate. They do, but Richard stood and walked to a filing cabinet. He removed a thin folder. I wasn't planning to discuss this without reviewing everything first. He returned to his desk. Earlier this year, a developer working in that corridor contacted several property owners. Your building was among the parcels they were interested in. I felt my heartbeat change. What developer? He gave me the name, but it meant nothing to me. Why didn't they contact me? They attempted to through public records, but there was no formal offer. It was preliminary interest. How much is the building worth? Richard paused. Based on recent comparable sales redevelopment activity, the size of your parcel, and its location, a reasonable estimate would currently be somewhere around $1.4 million. For several seconds, I thought I had misunderstood him. $1.4 million approximately. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Sometimes shock comes out strangely. Jason said a few $100,000. I heard you. I looked toward the window. Walter and I had bought that property because he believed the area would eventually change. He had been right. Even after death, Walter's patience had matured into something neither of us had expected. Then another thought struck me. Does Jason know Richard didn't answer? Richard. He folded his hands. I can't tell you everything another person may have discussed with this office if it was confidential, but I can tell you something relevant to your property. My stomach tightened. Jason contacted us several months ago. I stared at him. He asked general questions about transferring real estate into a business entity and what documentation would be required. Did he mention my building? Richard chose his words carefully. He made it sufficiently clear which property he was discussing that I told him the owner would need to authorize any transfer. The owner, me. Did you tell him the property was valuable? I told him that transferring appreciating real estate without independent valuation and legal advice would be unwise. I sat back. So Jason hadn't stumbled blindly into this. He knew enough to ask lawyers questions. He knew the neighborhood was being redeveloped. And he knew he couldn't obtain the property without my signature. Yet he had sat at my kitchen table and called it paperwork. I felt something deeper than anger, grief. For a moment I missed Walter so intensely that I could barely breathe. What would Walter do? I whispered. Richard's expression softened. I can't answer that, I know. But I can tell you what Walter consistently did when we worked together. I looked up. He never signed anything important because somebody rushed him. That sounded exactly like my husband. I almost smiled. Richard pushed Jason's documents away. My professional recommendation is simple. Do not sign these. I won't. We can notify Jason that you've declined. No. Richard raised an eyebrow. Not yet. Mildred. I stood and walked toward the window. I need to know something first. Whether my son still sees me. Richard waited. I turned back. For 3 years, every time Jason needed something, I helped him. Money, credit, the building. I kept telling myself I was helping him recover. My voice shook. Now I don't know if he loves me or if I've simply made myself useful. Those things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, I know. That was what made it worse. Jason could love me and still exploit me. Both could be true. I want to give him one chance, I said, to do what? To tell me the truth. Richard frowned slightly. How I'll tell him I came here, and I won't tell him what you told me. Richard understood. You want to see whether he discloses the property's value himself, yes. And if he doesn't, I looked at Jason's transfer documents, then I'll have my answer. Richard nodded slowly. Don't sign anything while you're testing him. I won't. And don't let him pressure you into meeting with anyone without your own counsel. I understand. I gathered my folders. At the door, Richard stopped me. Mildred. I turned. You don't owe anyone $1 million gift to prove you love them. The words landed harder than I expected. I drove home without turning on the radio. That evening, I placed Jason's folder on the kitchen table and stared at it. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. I met with Richard Bennett today. Silence. Not concern, not curiosity, just silence. Then Jason asked, Okay, so what did he say? He reviewed the documents. Another pause. My heart pounded. This was his opportunity. He could tell me about the redevelopment. He could tell me the property was worth far more than he'd suggested. He could apologize. Instead, he asked the one question that told me everything I needed to know. "So, did you sign?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said carefully, "but Richard is preparing paperwork." Jason exhaled. I could hear the relief in it. "That's great, Mom." I hadn't said what paperwork. He simply assumed. And in that instant, I decided I would let him keep assuming. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet. I wanted to see what my son would do when he believed the $1.4 million building was almost his. The answer began arriving sooner than I expected. Within 24 hours, Jason started treating me like his mother again. The change in Jason began the very next morning. At 8:12, my phone rang. "Good morning, Mom." I almost checked the screen twice. Jason hadn't called simply to say good morning in months. "Good morning. How'd you sleep? Fine. Just checking on you." That phrase would have warmed me once. Now it made me suspicious. We spoke for 5 minutes. He didn't mention the building. At 3:30 that afternoon, he called again. 2 days later, Rebecca called. "Mildred, I was thinking about Thanksgiving." Her voice carried the bright sweetness she usually reserved for people she wanted to impress. "We really want this year to be special." "That sounds nice. You'll come early, won't you?" "I usually do." "Of course. You're the heart of the family." I nearly dropped the phone. The heart of the family. Less than 2 months earlier, Rebecca had told me I didn't need much money at my age. Now, after Jason believed I was preparing to hand him valuable property, I had apparently become the emotional center of the Henry family. I wanted to believe the timing was coincidence. That was the embarrassing part. Even after everything Richard had told me, a piece of me still wanted to be wrong. Jason invited me to lunch that Friday. He chose one of my favorite restaurants. He paid. He asked about my garden. He asked whether I was sleeping better. For almost 40 minutes, we talked like we used to. Then while the waitress cleared our plates, he said casually, "Richard didn't give you any trouble, did he?" There it was, no. So everything's moving forward. He's preparing what needs to be prepared. I chose every word carefully. Jason smiled. "Good." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I really think Dad would be happy we're keeping everything in the family." The sentence nearly made me laugh. The building was already in the family, mine, but I only nodded. If Jason wanted to tell me the truth, I wasn't going to prevent him. He didn't. The final answer came from Sophie. She spent Saturday afternoon with me 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. We baked cookies, watched an old movie, and then sat at my kitchen table while she worked on a school project. Children have a way of revealing adult secrets because they don't understand which conversations they're supposed to pretend they never heard. Sophie was coloring the border of a poster when she said Mom wants to redo Dad's office. Again, she nodded. She wants one of those giant glass walls. That sounds expensive. Dad said we have to wait. I smiled. That sounds sensible. Sophie kept coloring. Mom said after Dad gets your building, they can finally do everything properly. My hand stopped around my coffee cup. What did she say? Sophie looked up. Did I say something bad? No, sweetheart, I forced my voice to remain gentle. What exactly did you hear? She shrugged. Mom was showing Dad pictures on her phone. She said once he gets Grandma's building, they can redo the office and maybe do something with the house, too. My chest tightened. Your house, Mom, wants a bigger kitchen. They had remodeled that kitchen less than 2 years earlier. Sophie leaned closer. Grandma, is Dad buying your building? There it was, the simplest question in the world. No. Her eyebrows drew together. Oh, why I thought maybe he was. What made you think that? Because Mom said it'll be ours soon. Ours again. I looked at my granddaughter and suddenly understood how far the assumption had spread. Jason and Rebecca weren't waiting to see whether I would give them the building. They had already mentally spent it. They were planning renovations around it. They were discussing it in front of their child, as if the decision had been made. I reached across the table. You haven't done anything wrong, Sophie. Are you mad? Not at you. She relaxed. We finished her project. I didn't mention the building again. But after Jason picked her up, I sat alone at the same kitchen table where he had first placed those transfer documents. I thought about every opportunity I'd given him. He could have told me the property was worth around $1.4 million. He could have explained his plans. He could have offered to buy it. He could have proposed rent. Instead, he had called ownership transfer simplifying things. And when he thought I had agreed, his wife began planning how to spend the benefit. I called Patty. She answered immediately. Well, how did you know something happened? Because you only call me at 8 on Saturday night when you're upset. I told her what Sophie had said. Patty was silent for several seconds. Then she asked, Are you ready now? For what? To stop making excuses for him. That hurt, mostly because she was right. I don't want to destroy my relationship with my son. You aren't the one who made this relationship depend on a building. I closed my eyes. What if saying no costs me? Jason Patty's voice softened. Mildred, if keeping your son requires handing him property because he's already decided it's his, what exactly are you keeping? I had no answer. The following Monday, I called Richard. I need another appointment. He didn't ask why. Tomorrow morning, yes. I arrived at 9 with Walter's old property folder. Richard closed his office door. What happened? He failed the test. I told him about Jason's sudden attention, Rebecca calling me the heart of the family, the lunch, then Sophie. Richard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "What do you want to do?" For the first time, I didn't say I needed more time. I am not transferring the building. Richard nodded. Good. And I don't want Jason treating it like his anymore. We can address that. I want everything clear, legally clear. Richard pulled a yellow pad toward him. We have several options. We talked for nearly an hour. About ownership. About Henry home renovations' free use of the property. About notice requirements. About protecting the asset in the future. And about Sophie. Walter had loved that girl beyond words. So did I. I didn't want Jason's financial decisions to determine whether something Walter and I built would someday help our granddaughter. Richard explained a trust structure that could protect the property while leaving me firmly in control during my lifetime. When he finished, I sat quietly. Do it. All of it. Yes. Richard studied me. Are you certain I thought about Thanksgiving, about Jason asking whether I had signed? About Rebecca planning a new kitchen? About Sophie innocently saying after Dad gets your building? Then I remembered Walter's handwriting, future redevelopment potential. Hold. I've spent 3 years making things easier for Jason, I said. Maybe it's time I stop making it easy for him to mistake my kindness for ownership. Richard gave a slow nod. I'll prepare the documents. Several days later, I returned. A thick cream-colored envelope sat on his desk. Inside were the papers that would establish boundaries I should have established years earlier. Richard pushed it toward me. You don't have to give this to Jason personally. I know. We can handle the notices formally. I know. I picked up the envelope. It felt surprisingly light, for something capable of changing so much. That evening, I placed it inside my purse. Jason called shortly afterward. Thanksgiving next Thursday, he said cheerfully. You're still coming early, right? Yes. And Mom, I already knew the question. The paperwork, I looked toward my purse. I'll bring it. His relief was immediate. Perfect. After we hung up, I touched the sealed envelope. Jason believed Thanksgiving would be the day I finally gave him the building. I still hoped it wouldn't become the day I discovered exactly how little a place at his table was worth. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of Virginia morning Walter used to love. I woke before 6. For a few seconds, lying in the darkness, I forgot he was gone. Then I reached toward his side of the bed. Empty. 3 years had passed, but grief still knew how to surprise me. Thanksgiving had always been Walter's favorite holiday, because as he liked to say, nobody has to buy anybody anything. You just show up hungry. I smiled at the memory. Then I remembered the envelope. It was inside my purse on the chair near my dresser. I had checked twice the night before. That morning I checked again. Still there, sealed, waiting. I went downstairs and started cooking. Jason had loved my sweet potato casserole since childhood. When he was 8, he once ate so much that Walter told him he'd turn orange by Christmas. I made it exactly the same way that morning. For all my anger, I still loved my son. That was the part nobody tells you about betrayal. Love doesn't disappear simply because trust has been damaged. Sometimes love makes the damage hurt more. Around 9, Patty called. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Are you cooking? Of course. Sweet potatoes, of course. She laughed. Then her voice became serious. Do you have it? I knew what she meant. Yes. And you're sure? I looked toward my purse. I'm sure about the decision. That wasn't what I asked. I sighed. I don't know if I'll give him the envelope today. Mildred, I know. No. Listen to me. You don't owe him a confrontation. Richard can handle everything. I understand. Then why carry it? Because some part of me was still waiting. I wanted Jason to surprise me. I wanted him to pull out a chair for me, put his arm around my shoulders and ask whether I was all right without immediately asking about property. I wanted one ordinary Thanksgiving with my son. I'm hoping I won't need it, I admitted. Patty was quiet. Then she said, just don't confuse hope with permission. I won't. Call me if you need me. I will. By noon, the casserole was finished. I changed into a navy dress Walter had always liked and put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 35th anniversary. Before leaving, I stood in front of his photograph in the hallway. You'd know what to do, I whispered. Of course, the photograph didn't answer. Maybe that was the point. For the first time, the decision had to be mine. Jason and Rebecca lived about 20 minutes away in a large colonial-style house they'd purchased 4 years earlier. There were already 8 cars outside when I arrived. I checked the address instinctively. Jason had told me it would be family and a couple of people. This looked like an event. Rebecca opened the door. "Mildred, you're here." She kissed the air beside my cheek and immediately reached for the casserole. "Oh, perfect. Put that in the kitchen, would you?" I stepped inside. The house smelled of turkey cinnamon and expensive candles. Voices filled the living room. Several people I recognized from Jason's business gatherings were holding drinks. Rebecca was already moving away. "Rebecca?" She turned. "I thought this was family dinner." "It is," she smiled. "We invited a few friends. Jason has some clients who didn't have anywhere to go." That sounded generous, but when I entered the living room, I noticed Rebecca's parents were there, her sister and husband, 2 couples I had met at business functions, and at least 3 people I didn't know. Jason crossed the room. "Mom." For 1 second, relief moved through me. He hugged me. "You look great." "Thank you." Then his eyes dropped toward my purse. So quickly someone else might have missed it. I didn't. He lowered his voice. "Did you bring the paperwork?" There it was, not "how are you?" Not "did you get here safely?" The paperwork. I looked at him. "It's in my purse." His shoulders visibly relaxed. "Great." Then he kissed my cheek. "Seriously, Mom, thank you." For what, he didn't know what was inside, but he thought he did. Before I could respond, someone called his name. Jason turned. "I'll catch up with you later." And he disappeared into the room. I stood there alone. Rebecca appeared moments later. "Mildred, could you help me in the kitchen?" Of course. For the next hour, I barely left it. I arranged rolls in baskets. I transferred vegetables into serving dishes. I wiped cranberry sauce from the counter. I checked the gravy. When Rebecca needed more wine glasses, I found them. When she wanted the good serving platter, I climbed onto a stool to reach it. Every few minutes, laughter drifted in from the living room. Once I walked toward the doorway. Rebecca stopped me. "Oh, Mildred, before you go, could you slice this?" She handed me bread, so I stayed. At one point, Sophie came running in. "Grandma." She wrapped her arms around me. That hug was the first thing all afternoon that felt genuine. "You look pretty. So do you." She wore a burgundy dress and had 2 small braids pinned back from her face. "Come sit with me. I will when everything's ready." She frowned. "Why are you doing all the work?" Before I could answer, Rebecca entered. "Sophie, go entertain Grandpa." "But Grandma." "Now, please." Sophie looked at me. I smiled. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She reluctantly left. Rebecca barely noticed. "Can you check the potatoes?" I looked at her, then at the kitchen. The countertops, the oversized island, the cabinets Jason had chosen during the renovation I had helped him afford. A strange thought entered my mind. I had contributed money toward a room I was now apparently working in while everyone else celebrated. I pushed the thought away. Not yet. At 4:30, Jason entered. Everything almost ready. 10 minutes, Rebecca said. He opened the refrigerator, then looked at me. "You okay, Mom?" The question surprised me. Yes, good. His eyes moved toward my purse, which I had placed on a chair near the pantry. He smiled. "I'm glad you're here." For one foolish second, those words warmed me. Then he added quietly, "After dinner, we'll take care of everything." The warmth vanished. I didn't ask what he meant. We both knew. At 5, Rebecca announced dinner. People began moving toward the dining room. I carried the sweet potato casserole myself. The table was beautiful. Candles, flowers, polished glasses. Every chair occupied or clearly positioned for someone. I counted without meaning to, then counted again. There was no place for me. Sophie noticed at almost the same moment. She looked around confused. "Grandma, where are you sitting?" Rebecca froze. Jason looked toward the table, and I watched my son's face as he realized exactly what had happened. For a moment, I thought he would fix it. I thought he would reach for another chair. Instead, the doorbell rang. Rebecca's face brightened. That must be Mr. Caldwell, Jason's most important client. Sophie grabbed the back of her chair. "Grandma can sit next to me. We can move over." Rebecca immediately shook her head. "No, sweetheart. We need that space." Then Jason looked at me. He looked at his client entering behind Rebecca. And finally, he looked toward the kitchen. That was when I knew which one of us he was about to choose. Mr. Caldwell entered the dining room smiling, completely unaware that his arrival had turned one missing chair into a decision my son could no longer avoid. "Sorry I'm late," he said. Traffic was worse than I expected. No problem at all, Jason replied immediately. We're glad you made it. I stood at the edge of the dining room holding the serving spoon I'd brought in with the casserole. Sophie was still gripping the back of her chair. Grandma can sit here. She started pulling it sideways. Rebecca stopped her. Sophie, don't. But there's no chair for Grandma, I know. Those 2 words hit me harder than they should have. I know. This wasn't an accident Rebecca had just discovered. She knew. I looked at Jason. He avoided my eyes for a second. Then he gave me the strained smile people use when they want you to cooperate with your own humiliation. Mom, yes. Could you just eat in the kitchen tonight? For a moment I genuinely wondered whether I had heard him correctly. The kitchen were already crowded. He gestured toward the table. It's just logistics. Logistics. 43 years with Walter had taught me that people often used complicated words when simple ones sounded too cruel. There isn't a seat for you. That was the simple version. Sophie stared at her father. Dad, no. Sophie. Grandma is family. I know Grandma is family. Then why can't she sit with us? A few guests suddenly became fascinated by their plates. Mr. Caldwell looked uncomfortable. I can sit somewhere else, he offered. No, absolutely not, Jason said quickly. You're our guest. I almost laughed. So was I, apparently. Just not the kind who deserved a chair. Rebecca stepped toward me. Mildred, please don't make this into something. I hadn't said a word. She lowered her voice. You'll probably be more comfortable in the kitchen anyway. It's quieter. I looked past her. The dining room was glowing with warm candlelight. My casserole sat in the center of the table. The room was filled with Rebecca's relatives, Jason's business contacts, and people I barely knew. And there was my granddaughter fighting harder for my dignity than my own son was. It's only one dinner, Rebecca added. Only one dinner. I thought about the check I'd written when Jason and Rebecca remodeled this room. Jason's business had been struggling then. They wanted to open the wall between the dining room and kitchen. Jason told me the renovation would improve the home's value. I had helped with so many things. The company, the credit line, Sophie, the building, always temporarily, always because family helped family. And now I was standing in a room partly improved with my money while being told there wasn't enough space for me. Jason picked up an empty dinner plate. Come on, Mom. He began putting food onto it. Turkey, potatoes, green beans, my sweet potato casserole. The casualness of the gesture was almost worse than anger. He was preparing to send me away like a child being served before the adults ate. Jason, I said. He looked up. Would your father have sent me into the kitchen? The room went silent. His hand stopped above the plate. That isn't fair. It's a question. Dad isn't here. The words landed like a slap. Jason seemed to regret them immediately. But he didn't apologize. Rebecca crossed her arms. Mildred, nobody is insulting you. I looked at her. Then why do I feel insulted? Her face tightened. Sophie stepped away from her chair. If Grandma eats in the kitchen, I'll eat with her. Sophie, sit down, Jason said. No, Sophie, I said I'll eat with Grandma. Jason's voice sharpened. Stop making a scene. Sophie flinched. Something inside me changed. Not exploded, changed. For 3 years, I had been terrified that saying no to Jason would cost me my son. But standing there, I finally understood what my silence had already cost. Every time I ignored Rebecca's comments, I taught her they were acceptable. Every time I gave Jason money without accountability, I taught him my resources were available whenever he wanted them. Every time I protected the relationship by swallowing disrespect, I made myself smaller. And now Sophie was watching. I would not teach my granddaughter that love required accepting humiliation. I set the serving spoon down. It's all right, Sophie. No, Grandma. I walked over and touched her shoulder. You stay here. Her eyes were already wet. Then Jason handed me the plate. Mom, we'll talk after dinner. I stared at it. After dinner, of course. Because after dinner he expected something. My eyes moved toward the kitchen. My purse was still on the chair near the pantry. Jason followed my gaze. His expression changed, only slightly. But I saw it. The envelope, he said. Rebecca looked at him. What Jason ignored her. He looked at me. You still have the envelope, right? There it was. I almost couldn't believe him. Less than 30 seconds after telling me to eat alone in the kitchen, my son remembered the paperwork he thought would give him my building. He had forgotten my chair, but not my property. I looked at the plate in his hand. Then at him. Yes. His shoulders relaxed. Okay, good, good. Something about that word erased the last bit of uncertainty I had carried into the house. Rebecca gestured toward the kitchen. Why don't we all just sit down before everything gets cold? I turned toward her. You're right. Relief crossed her face. She thought I was surrendering. So did Jason. I walked into the kitchen, but I didn't sit down. I placed the untouched plate on the counter. Then I picked up my purse. Behind me, I could hear chairs moving and silverware touching plates. Thanksgiving dinner was beginning without me. I opened my purse. The cream-colored envelope was exactly where I had left it. Richard's warning came back to me. "You don't have to give this to Jason personally." Patty's voice followed. "Don't confuse hope with permission." Then Walter, not his voice exactly, a memory. "If somebody needs your answer faster than you need to give it, figure out why." I pulled the envelope from my purse. When I turned back toward the dining room, Jason was watching me. His eyes went immediately to my hand. And then something remarkable happened. My son smiled, not because I was coming back to the table, not because he had changed his mind about my chair, because he saw the envelope. I walked toward him slowly. Rebecca noticed it too. Suddenly her expression softened. "Mildred," she said, "I'm sure we can squeeze in another chair if you really want." I stopped. 5 minutes earlier, there had been no room. Now there was. I looked at Jason, then Rebecca, then the guests who had witnessed everything. "No," I said quietly. Jason frowned. "No, what I don't need you to make room anymore." I placed my purse on the edge of the table. Then I held up the envelope. Jason's gaze locked onto it. "Is that the paperwork?" "Yes." He reached for it. I moved my hand back. Not yet. The smile disappeared from his face. For the first time that evening, everyone at the table was looking at me. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen if my son heard me say no. Jason's hand remained suspended between us for a second before he slowly lowered it. "What do you mean, not yet?" I looked around the table. Nobody was eating now. Mr. Caldwell stared down at his napkin. Rebecca's parents sat rigidly beside each other. Sophie watched me with wide eyes. Rebecca forced a smile. "Mildred, why don't we sit down and discuss whatever this is after dinner?" That almost made me laugh. 5 minutes earlier, there hadn't been room for me. Now Rebecca wanted me at the table. "No," I said. "Jason has been waiting several weeks for this. I think he should open it now." Jason's expression softened again. "Okay." He held out his hand. This time I gave him the envelope. He took it quickly. I remained standing. Rebecca pulled an extra chair from against the wall. "Here, we can make this work." I looked at the chair. "No, thank you, Mildred. You were right. There wasn't room for me when dinner started. Let's not rearrange things now just because I brought paperwork." Color rose in her face. Jason cleared his throat. "Mom, can we not do this? Open the envelope?" Something in my voice stopped him. Jason sat down. He slid one finger beneath the flap. For weeks he had believed that envelope contained exactly what he wanted, my signed agreement, transferring the commercial building to Henry Home Renovations. I watched the confidence in his face as he pulled out the documents. Then he read the first page. The confidence disappeared. His eyes moved rapidly down the sheet. He flipped to the second page. "What is this A notice? I can see that." His voice sharpened. "What does it mean you know what it means?" Rebecca leaned toward him. "What is it?" Jason didn't answer. I did. "Henry Home Renovations has been using my commercial property without paying rent. That arrangement is ending." Rebecca stared at me. "What the company will have the legally required period to make new arrangements. After that, Jason can either sign a proper lease under mutually agreed terms or move the company somewhere else." Jason pushed back from the table. "You're evicting me, no. That's exactly what this is. No, Jason, I'm ending an informal arrangement that was supposed to be temporary. You said I could use the building. I did. You never said there was a deadline. I said until you got back on your feet." He gave a bitter laugh. "You know how expensive commercial rent is?" "Yes, then you know what this could do to my company." I looked around the room. Several people shifted uncomfortably. "Jason, you told me your company was growing. It is. You remodeled your house. That has nothing to do with this. You bought a new vehicle. Mom, you host client dinners." Rebecca cut in. "Are you seriously auditing how we live?" "No. I'm explaining why I no longer believe free use of my property is necessary." Jason looked down at the papers again. Then he found the next document. I saw the exact moment he understood it. His face went pale. "No." Rebecca leaned closer. "What now?" Jason looked at me. "You declined the transfer?" "Yes." His voice rose. "You told me Richard was preparing the paperwork." "He was." "You let me think you were signing the building over." "I told you Richard was preparing paperwork. You never asked what kind. That is unbelievable. Is it you deliberately misled me?" I felt a strange calm. "Did you tell me the building was worth around $1.4 million?" Silence. Jason's eyes flicked toward the guests. Rebecca turned toward him. "What did she just say?" He ignored her. I continued. "When I asked what the property was worth, you told me maybe a few $100,000. I said values fluctuate. You knew the neighborhood was being redeveloped. That doesn't mean you attended development meetings. Jason stopped. Rebecca stared at him. Jason. He looked at me instead. This isn't the place. I almost smiled. You chose the place. What does that mean? You asked about the envelope at the Thanksgiving table. His jaw tightened. Because you said you'd bring it. And I did. Rebecca reached for the document. Jason pulled it away. What is going on? She demanded. He snapped. Not now. Her face changed. That was when I realized something. Rebecca had clearly expected the building, but she hadn't known everything. Jason stood. Do you understand what you've done, yes? No, you don't. You could destroy my company. I stared at my son. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying for weeks, how he blinked. What? How can I destroy your company by refusing to give you something that was never yours? Nobody moved. Jason opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. You've used my building rent-free for almost 2 years. I've loaned you money. I've guaranteed credit. I've helped with Sophie whenever you've asked. Don't bring Sophie into this. I didn't. I'm talking about what I gave willingly. I stepped closer. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing those things as gifts. That isn't true. Then why did Rebecca tell Sophie the building would soon be yours? Rebecca's face drained. Jason looked at her. She whispered, Sophie told you. She didn't understand it was supposed to be a secret. Mildred, we were planning, Rebecca said, with my property. We thought you had agreed. I hadn't. Jason slammed the documents onto the table. You're punishing me because of a misunderstanding at dinner. No. He pointed toward the kitchen. This is because of the chair. The question hurt more than I expected. No, Jason. The chair simply helped me understand everything else. Sophie lowered her eyes. I softened my voice. For 3 years I've been afraid that if I stopped giving, I'd lose my family. Jason's anger flickered. Mom, tonight you showed me something. I looked directly at him. You remembered the envelope before you remembered I needed a place at your table. He looked away. For the first time, shame appeared on his face, but then he glanced at the papers again. Fine, you made your point. He gathered them together. You're keeping the building. I understand. No, I said. His eyes lifted. You don't understand yet. I reached toward the documents. There should be one more page. Jason looked down. He shuffled through them. Then he found it. Richard had placed the final document behind the formal notice and my written refusal to transfer ownership. Jason began reading. His face changed again. This time it wasn't anger. It was fear. Rebecca saw it. What is that Jason didn't answer? She stood. Jason, what does it say? I looked at my son across the Thanksgiving table. That I said is the reason you'll never be able to use my building the way you planned. His eyes snapped toward mine, and suddenly I knew he understood that I had discovered far more than he ever intended me to know. Jason read the final document twice. The dining room had become so quiet that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Rebecca stood beside him. What does it say? Jason didn't answer. She reached for the document. He pulled it away. Jason, not now. Everyone is already watching us. Give me the paper. When he refused again, I answered for him. The property is being placed into a trust. Jason looked up sharply. Mom, you don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. No, you don't. Somebody put this idea in your head. There it was, the explanation he needed. If I disagreed with him, then surely I couldn't have reached the decision myself. Who I asked? Patty. He gave a bitter laugh. Of course. She's been suspicious of me for years. Patty didn't make the decision. Then Bennett did. Richard explained my legal options and scared you. No, he convinced you I was trying to steal from you. Rebecca finally grabbed the document from Jason. Her eyes moved down the page. A trust, yes. She looked at me. Why would you do this to protect something Walter and I spent decades building? From your own son, from anyone who believes my property is available without my consent. Jason pushed his chair back. This is insane. Mr. Caldwell quietly said, Jason, maybe this should be a private family conversation. Jason ignored him. What exactly did Bennett tell you that I remain in control of the property during my lifetime? Obviously. And the trust determines what happens later. Rebecca continued reading. Her eyes stopped. Sophie Jason turned toward her. What this says something about Sophie, I nodded. After my death, the trust is structured to protect the asset and prioritize Sophie's future, including her education. Sophie stared at me. Me, I smiled gently. You don't need to worry about any of this, sweetheart. Jason did not smile. So you skipped me. No, you put my daughter ahead of me. I protected an asset from being sold, leveraged, or swallowed by somebody else's debts. His face hardened. My debts, I hadn't mentioned his debts. The words had come from him. Rebecca caught it too. What debts? Jason looked at her. That's not what I meant. What debts? Jason, business debt. Every company has debt. I watched the crack open between them. Until that moment I had assumed Rebecca knew everything. She clearly didn't. Jason turned back to me. You think I'm irresponsible? I think you asked me for a valuable property without telling me its value. Oh, here we go again. Yes, here we go again. I'd raised my voice only slightly, but Jason stopped talking. I pointed toward the paper. You cannot sell the building. His jaw tightened. You cannot mortgage it. His eyes shifted. And you cannot use it as collateral for your company's obligations. That was the one. I saw it immediately. His anger disappeared for half a second, replaced by something closer to panic. Rebecca saw it too. Why does that matter? It doesn't. She stared at him. Then why do you look like that? I don't look like anything. I turned to Rebecca. Did Jason tell you what the building is worth? She folded her arms. He said it was valuable. How valuable? Jason interrupted. Mom. I ignored him. Rebecca looked uncertain. I don't know. 400,005. I felt almost sorry for her. Approximately $1.4 million. Rebecca's mouth opened. What? One of her relatives inhaled sharply. Jason rubbed his forehead. That's an estimate. From current comparable properties, I said. Rebecca turned slowly toward her husband. 1.4 million. It's not cash, Rebecca. You told me maybe $500,000 because nobody has made a formal offer. But you knew Jason stood. This is exactly why I didn't want to discuss business at Thanksgiving. I couldn't help myself. You were perfectly comfortable discussing paperwork when you thought I had signed it. His face reddened. Rebecca stared at him. What were you planning to do with it? Grow the company? How? We'll discuss it later. No, we're discussing it now. Jason looked around the table. His humiliation was becoming visible. I recognized the feeling. I'd been standing in it 20 minutes earlier, but I took no pleasure in seeing him there. I picked up my purse. I think I've said enough. Jason looked at me. You're leaving. You told me to eat in the kitchen. I decided I'd rather eat at home. Sophie jumped up. Grandma, don't go. My heart broke a little. I walked to her and hugged her. This isn't because of you. Can I come with you? Rebecca looked alarmed. I shook my head. Stay with your parents tonight. Sophie whispered, I'm sorry. For what? For Dad. Jason heard her. He flinched. I kissed Sophie's forehead. You don't apologize for adult sweetheart. Then I turned toward the doorway. Mildred. Rebecca's voice stopped me. When I looked back, she was holding the trust document. Her expression had changed completely. Did you do all of this before tonight? Yes. So sending you to the kitchen didn't cause this? No. Jason looked almost relieved. Then I added, it only confirmed I was right. The relief disappeared. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my coat. Behind me, voices began rising. Rebecca demanding answers. Jason telling her to stop, someone trying to calm them down. I stood for a moment beside the counter where my untouched dinner plate remained. Turkey, potatoes, green beans, sweet potato casserole. Everything cold now. I thought I would feel devastated. Instead, I felt strangely light. For 3 years, I had believed keeping peace meant absorbing whatever hurt came toward me. That night, I understood peace could also mean walking away. I left the plate where it was. Outside, the November air was sharp against my face. I reached my car before the front door opened behind me. Mom, Jason. I stopped but didn't turn immediately. He came down the walkway. We need to talk. Not tonight. This trust changes everything. For you, for the company. I turned. There was fear in his eyes now. Real fear. Why? He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than an answer. Jason, what were you going to do with my building? He looked toward the house, then back at me. I can't explain this out here. Then explain it another day. I opened my car door. Mom, please. I paused. Jason almost never said please anymore. You don't understand how close things are. What things? He swallowed. The company. I waited. But he said nothing else, so I got into my car. As I drove away, I looked once in the mirror. Jason stood alone at the end of his driveway. The son who had believed that evening would end with a $1.4 million property under his control now looked like a man watching his last escape route disappear. And for the first time, I realized the building wasn't something Jason merely wanted. He needed it. The question was why. Jason didn't call me the next day. Neither did Rebecca. For the first time in years, my phone remained almost completely silent on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Patty called at 9. While I was sitting at my kitchen table eating reheated sweet potato casserole for breakfast, I used the envelope. There was a pause. All of it. And I think Jason's company is in much worse trouble than he's admitted. Patty didn't sound surprised. What happened? I told her about the trust. About Rebecca learning the property's approximate value. Most importantly, I told her about Jason following me outside. You don't understand how close things are. Patty exhaled slowly. Don't give him anything. I know. Do you? That irritated me. Yes, Patty, good, because he's going to come to you. She was right. Jason arrived Sunday afternoon. I saw his SUV through the living room window. For several minutes, he remained inside it. When he finally walked to my door, he looked exhausted. No expensive jacket, no confident smile, just my son. I let him in. Coffee. He shook his head. We need to talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd placed the transfer papers 6 weeks earlier. Jason stared at his hands. Rebecca and I had a terrible fight. I'm sorry. She thinks I've been lying to her. Have you? His eyes lifted. Mom, that's a question. He looked away. Yes. The answer surprised me. Not because I hadn't suspected it, because he admitted it. How bad is the company? Jason rubbed both hands over his face. Bad. How bad? He stood and walked toward the window. I expanded too fast. I waited. We had a really strong year after Dad died. Bigger projects, better clients. I thought if I scaled quickly, we could become one of the largest renovation firms in the Richmond area. So you borrowed? Yes. How much? He didn't answer immediately. Enough, Jason. A lot. He began pacing. I hired people before the contracts were secure. Then material prices increased. 2 projects went over budget. Another client withheld payment because of a dispute, and the new SUV, he winced. I needed clients to think we were successful. Rebecca's kitchen? That wasn't business. No, it was money. He sat again. I kept thinking the next project would fix everything. I understood that pattern from years of working around construction companies. One profitable contract was supposed to cover the previous loss, then another. Eventually, a business wasn't growing. It was running. How long have you been in serious trouble? About 18 months. 18 months. During those 18 months, he had continued using my property for free and asking me for help. Does Rebecca know she knew cash was tight? She didn't know how tight. What does the building have to do with this? Jason became very still. That was the question he'd come hoping to avoid. Tell me. He looked at me. I needed collateral. There it was. For what? To refinance. My stomach tightened. Jason continued quickly. If I could consolidate the business debt into a longer-term facility, I'd lower the monthly payments. It would give us breathing room. And you intended to use my building, once it was transferred, as collateral. Yes. I stared at him. A $1.4 million property Walter and I had spent decades building. Jason hadn't simply wanted it. He intended to borrow against it. Did you tell the bank you owned it? No. His answer came too quickly. Jason, I said the transfer was in process. I felt cold. You told a lender I was transferring the building to you before I'd agreed I believed you would. Why? He looked genuinely confused by the question. Because you're my mother. There it was. Not because we'd negotiated, not because he'd explained the risk, because you're my mother. You built a financial plan around my inability to tell you no. That isn't fair. Isn't it? I wasn't stealing it. You wanted me to sign over $1 million property so you could put debt against it, to save the company Dad believed in. I stood. Do not use your father to justify this. Jason flinched. Dad would understand. No, your father would have asked why you were risking an asset you didn't earn to cover debts you didn't disclose. His face twisted. You think I'm a failure. The anger disappeared from his voice. What remained sounded like a frightened boy. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Jason, Dad built everything carefully. Everybody respected him. He never made stupid mistakes. Yes, he did. Jason looked at me. Your father made plenty, not like this. You were a child for most of them. You didn't see what happened behind closed doors. He sank into the chair. I wanted him to be proud of me. He was. I wanted to build something bigger. And somewhere along the way, bigger became more important than stable. Jason stared at the floor. Then he began to cry, quietly. I hadn't seen my son cry since Walter's funeral. My instincts screamed at me to move toward him, to put my arms around him, to say I would fix it. That was what I had always done. Instead, I sat across from him. I was scared, Mom. I believe you. I kept thinking I'd turn it around. I believe that, too. If I lose the building, the refinancing doesn't work. You never had the building. He closed his eyes. You know what I mean. Yes. And that's the problem. He wiped his face. What am I supposed to do? I don't know yet. You could stop the trust. No. His eyes opened. You could still transfer the property. No, Mom, please, no, he stood abruptly. You don't even know what happens if the bank pulls back. Then tell me, I could lose the company. The sentence hung between us. I thought of Walter, of the pride on his face when Jason got his first major contract, of the sign outside Henry Home Renovations, of my son's employees and their families. Then Jason said the words he had probably been holding back since he arrived. Are you really going to let me lose everything? My heart cracked, because he was still asking the wrong question. He wasn't asking whether I would help him find a responsible way out. He was asking whether I would absorb the consequences for him. I walked toward him. I love you. He looked away. But I will not give you the building. Then you're choosing property over your son. No. I shook my head. For the first time, I'm refusing to choose between them. He stared at me. You're 42 years old, Jason. If your company can only survive by taking something I spent my life building, then giving it to you won't solve your problem. What will responsibility? He laughed bitterly. That doesn't pay creditors. No, but it may be where we start. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It meant I wasn't going to rescue him, but it also meant I wasn't ready to abandon him. And before Jason left my house that afternoon, I was going to offer him one final kind of help, the kind that wouldn't cost me my building, the kind he would hate far more. Jason stared at me as if the word responsibility were an insult. What exactly are you suggesting? I returned to the table. Sit down. He hesitated, then sat across from me. I folded my hands. I will not pay your debts. His jaw tightened. I will not transfer the building. I heard you. I will not borrow against my house, touch my retirement savings, or guarantee another business loan. Then what are we talking about? A way for you to save yourself? Jason gave a humorless laugh. If I knew how to do that, I wouldn't be sitting here. You know, Richard Bennett, your lawyer, our family lawyer, and he knows people who work with distressed businesses. Jason's expression changed. No, you haven't even heard the proposal. I know what those people do. What they tear companies apart. They examine the numbers. Same thing. No, Jason, those aren't the same thing. I could see his pride rising like a wall, so I continued before he could interrupt. You open the books completely. Every debt, every contract, every outstanding invoice, every credit line. His face hardened. You sell what the company doesn't need, like what you tell me. He looked away. The SUV if necessary. That vehicle is part of the company's image. Then perhaps the company has been spending too much money on its image. He stood. You don't understand how business works now. I almost smiled. I spent nearly 30 years managing finances for a construction company. That's different. Not as different as you'd like it to be. Jason paced across the kitchen. And what about the building? If your company can afford market rent after restructuring, we discuss a lease. His head snapped toward me. You're actually going to charge me? Yes, I'm your son. And Henry Home Renovations is a business. He stared at me. I knew what he wanted me to do. So did he. He wanted me to soften the sentence, to say maybe, to promise some exception. Instead, I let the silence remain. Finally, Jason said, I can't believe Dad would want this. I stood. Stop. He went quiet. You have used your father's memory every time you wanted me to ignore my own judgment. His face fell. I didn't. Yes, you did. My voice trembled, but I didn't lower it. Walter loved you. He believed in you. But believing in you does not mean he would have handed you everything he spent his life earning because you were afraid to admit you'd made mistakes. Jason looked down. I continued more softly. You asked me if I was willing to let you lose everything. His eyes returned to mine. The answer is no. Hope flashed across his face. But I am willing to let you lose things. The hope vanished. The expensive vehicle. I counted on my fingers. The oversized office. The projects you shouldn't have taken. The image you're spending money to maintain. Maybe even part of the company. You make that sound easy. It won't be. You have no idea what people will say. There it was. Not only fear of financial collapse, fear of humiliation. People already talk, Jason. He frowned. About everybody. Then they go home and worry about their own lives. He looked exhausted. I don't want everyone thinking I failed. Then stop confusing a smaller company with failure. He didn't answer. I can give you Richard's contact. He'll make an introduction. That's what I'm offering. And if I refuse, then you handle the consequences yourself. Jason stared at me for a long time. I could almost see the battle inside him. He wanted rescue. I was offering accountability. They looked very different. Finally, he picked up his coat. I need to think. That would be wise. He reached the doorway, then stopped. Rebecca is furious. With me, with everybody. She's allowed to be angry. She says you're trying to control us. I shook my head. No, Jason, I'm finally controlling what belongs to me. He left without hugging me. I closed the door and leaned against it. Then I cried, not dramatically, just quietly. Saying no had sounded powerful in my imagination. In reality, it hurt. This was my only son. I remembered holding him when he had pneumonia at 5, teaching him to drive, watching Walter straighten Jason's tie on his wedding day. Every maternal instinct told me to run after him and make the problem disappear. But another thought stopped me. If I rescued Jason again, what would I actually teach him? That enough pressure eventually turned my no into yes. That tears erased deception. That being my son meant never having to face consequences. I couldn't do that anymore. My phone rang around 7 that evening. I expected Patty. Instead, Sophie's name appeared. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi, Grandma." Her voice was quiet. "Everything okay, I guess." I heard a door close in the background. Mom and Dad are arguing. My heart tightened. "I'm sorry you're hearing that. Is it because of Thanksgiving?" "That's something your parents need to work through." She was silent. Then she said, "Dad told Mom you embarrassed him." I closed my eyes. "I didn't mean for you to be caught in the middle, I know." Another pause. Then Sophie asked Grandma, "Yes, were you really going to eat in the kitchen?" The question nearly broke me. "I don't know. I was going with you. I know you were. I didn't like how they treated you." My throat tightened. Sometimes adults make bad decisions when they're worried about what other people think. Dad made a bad decision. Yes. She thought for a moment. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "I'm glad you didn't go to the kitchen." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Tears came before I could stop them. "Grandma, I'm here. Are you crying a little? Did I make you sad?" "No, sweetheart." I wiped my face. "You reminded me of something important." What that people are always watching, what we teach them about how they should be treated. She didn't completely understand. She didn't need to. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room. Patty had warned me that boundaries mattered. Richard had protected those boundaries legally, but Sophie had given me the reason I needed emotionally. If I had gone into that kitchen quietly, what would my granddaughter have learned? That older women should accept humiliation to keep families comfortable. That love means staying silent. That money earns respect until the money stops no. Whatever happened to Jason's company, I would not teach Sophie that lesson. 2 days later, Richard called. Jason contacted me. I sat straighter. What did he say? He wants the name of the restructuring specialist. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I smiled. Did he really? He did. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't redemption, but it was something I hadn't seen from my son in a long time. The beginning of responsibility. And over the next several months, Jason would discover exactly how expensive his pride had become. Jason met with the restructuring specialist 3 days later. I only knew because Richard called afterward. He showed up, he said. That sounds like a very low standard. Richard laughed. Sometimes showing up is the first standard. I didn't ask for details. That was deliberate. For years, Jason had brought me his problems, and I had immediately tried to solve them. If he was going to rebuild his business, I needed to stop standing over his shoulder. The first visible change came 2 weeks later. The SUV disappeared. I noticed when Jason came to my house in an older pickup truck. What happened to the other vehicle? Sold it. He sounded embarrassed. I thought clients needed to see success. And now I need to make payroll. There was no self-pity in his voice. That mattered. Henry Home Renovations began shrinking. Jason closed the expensive showroom he'd leased to impress clients. 2 administrative positions were consolidated. He stopped bidding on projects that required large upfront material purchases. Most painfully, he had to meet with his employees and explain that the company had expanded beyond what its finances could support. He told me about that conversation one evening. I thought they'd all think I was an idiot. Did they? One probably did. I smiled. And the others? Mostly they wanted to know if they'd still have jobs. That was another lesson. While Jason had been worrying about appearing successful, the people around him were worried about practical things. Paychecks, mortgages, groceries. Rebecca handled the changes less gracefully. The kitchen renovation she had been planning disappeared. So did a vacation. Then came the phone call. "I hope you're happy." I knew immediately it was Rebecca. About what Jason sold the SUV. I heard. He's talking about canceling our club membership. That sounds like a decision between you and Jason. You started this. No. If you had transferred the building like everyone expected, I interrupted. Everyone? She stopped. Jason expected. That's different. You know what I mean. I do. That's why I'm correcting you. Rebecca exhaled sharply. Mildred, you could solve this. Yes. That silenced her. I continued. I could give Jason the building. I could probably pay a large portion of his debt too. Exactly, but I won't. Why? Because then Jason learns that dishonesty works if the emergency becomes large enough. That isn't fair. Neither was planning around property that didn't belong to you. Rebecca went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. We really thought it would become ours. I know. That was the problem. 3 months passed, then 4. The company survived. Not comfortably, but it survived. The restructuring specialist helped Jason renegotiate payment terms with several creditors. He sold equipment the company rarely used. He abandoned expansion plans. Henry Home Renovations became smaller. For Jason, that was humiliating at first. Then something unexpected happened. Smaller made the company manageable. One afternoon, he came to my house carrying coffee. We made money last month. Congratulations, not much. Profit doesn't have to be impressive to be real. He smiled faintly. That sounds like Dad. It should. He said it constantly. Jason looked around my kitchen. I didn't listen to him enough. Most children don't listen until the advice becomes expensive. That made him laugh. It was the first easy laugh we'd shared since Thanksgiving, but I remained careful. A pleasant afternoon wasn't proof that everything had changed. I had spent too many years mistaking temporary kindness for permanent growth. The building still had to be addressed. Jason's free use period was ending. Richard handled most of the negotiations. I insisted the arrangement be formal: written lease, insurance requirements, maintenance responsibilities, monthly rent. Jason didn't like the number at first. This is market rent. It's actually somewhat below comparable properties, I said. He looked embarrassed. So you're still helping me? A little. Why? Because boundaries don't require cruelty. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll sign it. And he did. The first rent payment was due on the 1st of the following month. I expected it to be late, not because I wanted Jason to fail, but because history had trained me to expect promises before performance. On the 1st, nothing arrived. By noon, I felt disappointment creeping in. At 2, the mail came. There was an envelope from Henry Home Renovations. Inside was the rent check. Correct amount, correct date. No excuses. Then I noticed a small folded piece of paper, Jason's handwriting. I opened it. I should have done this years ago. That was all. I sat at my kitchen table holding the note. My first instinct was to call him. Instead, I placed it in the drawer where I kept important letters. An apology mattered. Consistency mattered more. The following month, rent arrived on time again. Then the next. Jason stopped asking me for money. When Sophie needed something for school, Jason and Rebecca paid for it. If I offered to buy her a gift, it became a gift again, not an expectation. Even Rebecca changed gradually. Not warmly, not immediately, but the sharpness faded. One afternoon, she brought Sophie over and stayed for coffee. I was angry at you, she admitted. I know. I thought you were trying to punish us. And now? She looked down. I think Jason and I had gotten used to living like everything would eventually work itself out. Things rarely do. She gave a tired smile. I know that now. I didn't absolve her. I didn't need to. Healing I was learning wasn't pretending nothing happened. It was allowing better behavior to exist without erasing the memory of the old behavior. By summer, Henry Home Renovations was smaller but stable. Jason had fewer employees, fewer impressive projects, less debt, and more sleep. He looked healthier. So did Rebecca. But I still wondered whether the change would last once the immediate fear faded. Then October arrived. Almost a year had passed since Jason placed those transfer documents on my kitchen table. One evening, I took out the note he'd sent with his first rent check. I should have done this years ago. I read it again. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the son I'd raised was finding his way back. But trust is not rebuilt because someone says the right sentence. It returns slowly through repetition, through choices, through what someone does when they no longer desperately need something from you. A week before Thanksgiving, Jason called. Mom, can I come over tomorrow? My stomach tightened automatically. Is something wrong, No? Do you need something? There was a long pause, then he said quietly, No, that's actually part of what I want to talk about. The next afternoon, Jason arrived at my door. He carried no folder, no contract, no financial statement. For the first time in years, my son had come to ask me for nothing. He had come to apologize. Jason arrived at 3 the next afternoon. I watched him through the front window before opening the door. No folder, no envelope, no laptop bag. He carried nothing except his car keys. That shouldn't have mattered. But after the previous year, I noticed what people carried into my house. Come in. Thanks, Mom. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Jason looked around the room and gave a nervous smile. A lot happened at this table. Yes, most of it because I wanted something. I didn't rescue him from the silence. That was another habit I had broken. Jason rubbed his palms together. I've been trying to figure out how to say this without making excuses. Then don't make excuses. He nodded. Okay, he looked directly at me. I lied to you. The simplicity of it surprised me. I knew the building was worth more than I told you. I said nothing. I knew redevelopment was happening. I didn't know exactly what an appraisal would say, but I knew it could be worth over $1 million. That would have been useful information when you asked me to sign it over. I know. His eyes dropped. I told myself it didn't matter because eventually the building would probably come to me anyway. That hurt. Not because it was new, because he finally said aloud what I had suspected. You treated my death like part of your business plan. Jason winced. When you say it like that, how should I say it? He shook his head. No, you're right. He took a breath. I was wrong. I waited. I was wrong to use Dad whenever I needed you to agree with me. I was wrong to make you feel like saying no meant you didn't believe in me. I was wrong to let Rebecca and me talk about the building like it already belonged to us. His voice grew quieter. And I was wrong about Thanksgiving. There it was. The part I still remembered most clearly. Not the $1.4 million, not the documents. A chair. Jason stared at his coffee. I've replayed that dinner 100 times. So have I. I keep seeing you standing there. My throat tightened. You were holding that plate, I remembered. Turkey, potatoes, green beans, my own casserole. I knew there wasn't a seat, Jason continued. I looked at him. You knew before Mr. Caldwell arrived. He nodded. Rebecca told me the table was full. The admission hurt more than I expected. You knew, yes, and you didn't fix it, no. Why? Jason swallowed. Because Caldwell was considering giving us a major contract. I thought if everything looked polished and successful, it would help. I almost couldn't believe the irony. You were trying to impress a client while your company was collapsing. I know. And sending your mother into the kitchen was part of looking successful. His eyes filled. No. Then what was it, cowardice? The word stopped me. Jason wiped his eyes. I knew it was wrong. The second I said it, I knew. Then why didn't you correct it? Because everyone was watching. So you were afraid of being embarrassed. Yes, I let that sit between us. Then he said something I hadn't expected. The building isn't the thing I'm most ashamed of. I frowned. It should be fairly high on the list. It is. A weak smile crossed his face and disappeared. But the worst part was when Sophie tried to give you her chair. My chest tightened. I saw my 12-year-old daughter understand something I was pretending not to understand. What, that you were being treated badly. He looked down. And then I told her to stop making a scene. I remembered Sophie's face, the way she had flinched. Jason continued. I spent months thinking I was angry because you embarrassed me in front of everybody. And now I understand I was angry because you made me see myself clearly. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Jason looked up. I'm sorry, Mom. No justification followed. No request, no but. Just the apology. I believed him. That didn't mean everything disappeared. I forgive you, I said. Jason closed his eyes briefly, but he opened them. The trust stays. He nodded immediately. I know, the building remains protected. I know, you continue paying rent. I know, I studied him. You aren't going to ask me to reconsider, no. That answer meant almost as much as the apology. I don't want the building anymore, he said. I raised an eyebrow. I mean, obviously I'd like to own a $1.4 million building. I laughed despite myself. He smiled, but not like that. He leaned back. I need to build something that's actually mine. For a moment, I could almost hear Walter, not because Jason sounded exactly like him, because he finally sounded like the man Walter had hoped he would become. A few days later, Rebecca came by. Her apology was less polished. Maybe that made it more believable. I was awful, she said. You were. She blinked. Apparently, she had expected me to soften it. I didn't. Then she laughed nervously. I probably deserved that. She apologized for her comments about my age, for assuming the building would become theirs, and for Thanksgiving. I cared too much about what that dinner looked like, she admitted, and not enough about how it felt. She nodded. Exactly. I accepted her apology, but I didn't pretend we were suddenly best friends. Trust had to grow at its own pace. The day before Thanksgiving, Jason called. There was hesitation in his voice. Mom, yes, will you come tomorrow? I looked toward the dining room where Walter and I had hosted so many holidays. Part of me wanted to stay home. Part of me was still standing in Jason's dining room with a plate in my hands. I don't know. I understand. No pressure, no pressure. That mattered. Then he added, it'll be smaller this year, just family. I smiled faintly. I'll think about it, okay. After we hung up, I walked to Walter's photograph. You'd tell me to go, wouldn't you? I smiled. Then I shook my head. No. You'd tell me to decide for myself. That evening, I took my navy dress from the closet. I laid it across the bed. Beside it, I placed the pearl earrings Walter had given me. The next morning, I dressed slowly. Before leaving, I picked up my purse. For a moment, I remembered the cream-colored envelope. This time, there was no legal paperwork inside. No transfer documents, no notices, no weapon hidden behind a flap of paper, just my wallet keys, tissues, and lipstick. I drove toward Jason's house, wondering whether I was ready to sit at that table again. When I stepped through his front door, Sophie came running toward me. Grandma. She hugged me. Then she grabbed my hand. Come see what she pulled me toward the dining room. I stopped in the doorway. The table was smaller than the year before. Fewer decorations, fewer guests. But my eyes went immediately to one particular chair. There was a handmade card resting on the plate. Sophie had written one word across it. Grandma. And behind that chair stood Jason, waiting to pull it out for me. For several seconds, I couldn't move. It was only a chair. Wooden frame, cream-colored cushion. Nothing remarkable about it. But a year earlier, the absence of that chair had told me everything I needed to know. Now, Sophie stood beside me, holding my hand. Do you like it? I looked at the handmade card. Grandma. The letters were slightly uneven, decorated with tiny orange leaves. I love it. I made everybody's, she said proudly. But yours first. Jason stood behind the chair. He looked nervous. Not the nervousness of someone waiting for a signature. The nervousness of someone who knew an apology didn't automatically erase a memory. He pulled the chair back. I didn't sit immediately. My mind returned to the previous Thanksgiving, the plate in Jason's hand, Rebecca telling me it was only one dinner, Sophie offering me her seat, the kitchen, the envelope. Jason noticed my hesitation. His hand remained on the chair. Then he said quietly, You should never have had to earn a place here. I looked at my son. No, I said. I shouldn't have. His eyes lowered. I touched the back of the chair. And nobody should have to buy their place in a family. I know. There was no argument, no defense, just acknowledgement. So I sat down. Sophie immediately took the chair beside me. This Thanksgiving looked very different. Rebecca's parents were there, along with her sister and husband. No clients. No business prospects. No Mr. Caldwell. There were fewer flowers and no expensive centerpiece. The table didn't look like something from a magazine. It looked like a family dinner. Rebecca carried in the turkey. Please tell me I didn't ruin it. Jason inspected it dramatically. Depends. Is the fire department still outside? She swatted his arm. Sophie laughed. So did I. The sound surprised me. For a moment I remembered what holidays had felt like before everything became complicated. Then I noticed a framed photograph on a side table. Walter. It was one of my favorites. He was standing beside an old barbecue grill wearing an apron Sophie had decorated when she was 5. Jason followed my gaze. I thought Dad should be here too. My throat tightened. He would have liked that. Dinner began. Nobody mentioned the building. That mattered. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody asked me for money. That mattered too. Halfway through dinner, Jason talked about Henry home renovations. We finally paid off one of the high-interest credit lines. Rebecca raised her glass to smaller payments. Everyone laughed. How's business? I asked. Smaller. Jason smiled. Better. He had 12 employees now instead of 23. He no longer chased every large contract. He focused on residential projects the company could actually manage. I used to think growth meant getting bigger every year, he said. And now I think sometimes growth means knowing what not to take on. I smiled. Walter would have appreciated that answer. The building remained in the trust. I had never reversed that decision. Jason continued paying rent each month. The trust protected the property and ensured that after I was gone, its benefits would support Sophie according to the structure Richard and I had created. I didn't change those protections because Jason apologized. That was another lesson I had learned. Forgiveness did not require returning to the conditions that made betrayal possible. I could forgive my son and still keep my boundaries. I could love him without financing his mistakes. I could welcome Rebecca into my life without pretending her words had never hurt me. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without allowing the wound to control every future decision. After dinner, Sophie insisted that I stay seated while she helped clear the table. Grandma is a guest, she announced. Rebecca looked at me. Then she smiled. She's right. A year earlier, that sentence might have sounded performative. Now it felt different. Maybe because nobody wanted anything from me afterward. No envelope waited in my purse. No signature was expected. There was only pie. Later, Jason and I stood on the back porch while the others cleaned the kitchen. The evening air was cold. He handed me a cup of coffee. "Do you remember last year?" he asked. I gave him a look. "I am 69, Jason. My memory works perfectly well." He laughed. "I deserve that." "Yes." We stood quietly. Then he said, "I thought you were going to destroy my life." When I opened that envelope. And now, he looked through the window at Sophie. "Now I think you probably saved part of it." I didn't answer. I hated selling the SUV, he continued. "I remember. I hated shrinking the company. I remember that too. I especially hated paying you rent. That part I enjoyed." He laughed. Then his expression became serious. "But if you'd given me the building, I would have borrowed against it. I know. And if the company still failed..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Walter's building could have disappeared with Jason's debts. "I was asking you to risk something you spent decades building because I couldn't admit I'd spent 5 years pretending to be more successful than I was. You were afraid. That doesn't excuse it, no." He looked at me. "Thank you for not rescuing me. That sentence affected me more than his apology. You're welcome." He smiled. Then I added, "Don't expect me to make a habit of being thanked for refusing $1,000,000 gifts." He laughed again. Inside, Sophie tapped on the glass. "Pie." We went back in. As I sat at the table eating pumpkin pie, I thought about Walter. For years after his death, I had been terrified of losing more family. That fear had made me say yes when I should have asked questions. It made me tolerate comments that hurt. It made me believe keeping peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I thought boundaries pushed people away. Sometimes they do. But sometimes boundaries are the only thing that gives a relationship a chance to become honest. Jason hadn't lost everything. He had lost the version of his life built on appearances. In exchange, he had built something smaller and more real. And so had I. When I left that evening, Sophie hugged me at the door. "Best Thanksgiving?" I smiled. "It's pretty high on the list." Jason kissed my cheek. "Drive safe, Mom." No question followed. No request. Just drive safe. On the way home, I realized something. The greatest thing I protected that year wasn't a $1.4 million building. It was my own sense of worth. A year earlier, I had believed my place in the family depended on how much I gave. Now I knew better. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love worth preserving in that form. Family can need forgiveness. Family can need second chances. But family also needs boundaries. And sometimes the most loving word a mother can say is the one I had spent years being afraid to use. No, that Thanksgiving I finally had my place at the table. Not because I paid for it, not because I signed something, not because I stayed silent. I had a place, because I had finally stopped accepting a version of love that required me to earn one. And this time I sat down knowing I belonged. Looking back, I used to believe generosity was one of the purest ways to love someone. And it can be, but generosity without boundaries can slowly become something dangerous. For years, I told myself that helping Jason was simply what a mother did. When he needed money, I gave it. When his business needed space, I provided it. When he needed another chance, I created one. What I didn't understand was that by protecting him from every consequence, I was preventing him from learning how to carry the weight of his own decisions. And somewhere along the way, my gifts stopped feeling like gifts to him. They became expectations. That was why Thanksgiving hurt so deeply. I had helped pay for the room. I had helped support the man sitting at the head of the table. I had cooked food for the meal. Yet when there wasn't enough space, I was the person sent away. The missing chair showed me what all the money and paperwork had hidden. I had been trying to purchase peace with sacrifice, but a seat at the family table should never have to be purchased with money, property, silence, or sacrifice. The envelope didn't destroy my family. It destroyed an unhealthy pattern. Jason had to face consequences, Rebecca had to examine her entitlement, and I had to confront my fear that setting boundaries would leave me alone. Most importantly, I learned that forgiveness does not mean surrender. I forgave Jason, but the trust stayed. The building stayed protected. The rent continued. Those boundaries did not make my love smaller. They made our relationship more honest. Sometimes saying no doesn't end a family. Sometimes it's the first opportunity that family has to become healthy. So let me ask you something. If you had been standing where I was that Thanksgiving night, would you have gone quietly into the kitchen or would you have opened that envelope at the table? And after everything Jason did, would you have given him a second chance? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know what you would have done. And if this story reminded you that your dignity matters even with the people you love most, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal, courage, justice, and second chances. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't turning your back on the people you love. Sometimes it's finally teaching them how to love you properly.